Hello and welcome to No, It's Crochet. My name is Nicole Bandus, and today we're going to be talking about a hot take, and that's the idea of whether or not crochet is an art or a craft. I want to know first, what do you think? Tell me in the comments below. Is crochet an art or is it a craft? Now, this is a thought that came up. I was reading through some Reddit rants, and this came up that crochet is often thought of more as a craft, and so maybe it doesn't get the seriousness that other forms of art might, like jewelry making or painting or those kind of things, that it sort of falls more into the category of being a craft, something that is a skill but doesn't necessarily require creativity. And I'm going to throw up right here the definition of art and then the definition of craft, so that we can kind of compare it and have that open conversation together. So as you can kind of see, art generally is thought of as something that has an emotional value to it, that is considered a form of beauty, that there is some, aesthetic to it overall. Whereas craft is often sort of that merging of form and function with a visual aspect to it, but something that's maybe more functional. And if we think a lot about most of what we crochet, there is some function to it. Now, we might find tapestries that have no function other than being art in and of themselves, wall hangings, those kind of things. But most of the things that we crochet, whether it is a piece of clothing or a household good, even blankets, for example, there is some function to that. Now, I have my own sort of definition of the difference between art and craft. For me, the way I sort of look at it is that art is something that, well, let me reverse it. Craft is something that is replicated, meaning that if we follow a pattern, whether that pattern is a pattern for a crochet hat, or if it's a crochet, amigurumi character, if we're following a pattern specifically, maybe that is, in the art world, it could be something like a paint by numbers, or, something along those lines, where we're following somebody else's guidance overall. That's when I consider it more of a craft. It is a skill, but we are following the directions that are given to us. To me, that's when it becomes a craft. If, on the other hand, we take something and we create it from scratch using something that would normally be considered a skill, crocheting can be a skill. The things that we make with crochet can either be art or they can be crafts. So, for example, let me pull this over. I haven't introduced this yet, but this shirt that I've created, let me get her better in the camera. Okay, so this shirt, I did not follow a pattern. I came up with this completely from scratch. I didn't see anything that inspired me on how to do this. Now, I saw things that inspired me in some ways, meaning, hey, let's alter clothing, but not specifically in how I did this. And I'll talk more about this on Thursday's video. But this, I created it completely from scratch. I selected how I was going to do it. I selected the yarn I was going to use, and I didn't follow somebody else's directions for this. Compared to, let's set you back over here. This hat, for example, I followed some instructions very explicitly. I followed a pattern on how to do this. I didn't make any alterations other than the color of the yarn that I used. This, I would say, leans more towards the craft. Now, there was some art to it in that I chose the color, and honestly, I think I chose a different type of yarn than what the pattern writer used, so that's a little bit more on the creative artsy side of things as well. And so while it is extremely functional, it is more on the craft side with just a little touch of art. That's how I sort of look at the difference. And this person was specifically talking about craft fairs and vendor shows, and how you can go to some of these and you can see art shows where there are pieces of art that sell for a high dollar, but the things that we crochet rarely get their worth given to them. They're rarely valued as art. And my thought process on that is because I can go to a farmer's market or a craft show and see dozens and dozens and dozens of very similar items. That makes them a commodity. It doesn't make them a piece of art. I don't go to farmers markets and see pieces of art being sold. I go to art shows and see art, and I never go to an art show and see crochet garments being sold. So I think part of that is in where these items are being sold and how we as makers are marketing our goods, just as much as that is what it is that we're making. So first of all, we have sort of that aspect of, okay, we're making something that everybody else can make too, meaning that there are hundreds of crocheters out there that are making amigurumi chickens. So if you want me to spend $50 on an amigurumi chicken, why would I call that a piece of art when there are 10 chickens sitting in this booth, and I walk down 3 more booths and there are 10 more chickens? Maybe using different art, maybe using a slightly different pattern, but frankly, they look pretty similar overall. You have relegated those items to being commodities and no longer being pieces of art. That means that certain things we have to look at and say, okay, where am I marketing it? How am I marketing it? And how can I make people look at this different? Here's another example that I have. There are a lot of crocheters out there that are upcycling sweatshirts and using a granny stitch on the sweatshirt to make sleeves. There are a handful of people that are upcycling denim jackets, and again, they're using granny stitch to alter the sleeves. Okay, but the more people that we have doing that, then the more that becomes a commodity. So we have to start looking at something different. And that's why when I create things like my denim jackets, I don't use a granny stitch. I use something that's a different kind of stitch. I usually try and use a yarn that is a little bit more expensive. This one I went, on the inexpensive end, but that was only because this yarn suited this jacket perfectly. Like, I could not have found a better yarn for this jacket as far as the color pattern, but I didn't use a granny stitch. I created a stitch pattern that was unique for this jacket, and then I modified the sleeves in a very unique way. So I consider this more like a piece of art. Yes, it's wearable. It is a functional piece of art. But sometimes, clothing can be functional art when we really look at some of those haute couture, however you say that fancy word. Anyway, so sometimes we can look at those things as piece of art, even if they are functional. it's not necessarily a craft, because it goes, in my opinion, beyond just following a pattern that's easily replicated in mass quantities. If I can make something in 15 minutes, it's probably a craft and not a piece of art. Art takes time, it takes thought, it takes inspiration. You know, there should be, in my humble opinion, of course, something that is unique about that piece, so that it is not the same as every other piece that you've made. If you, like, here's another example. I just had someone pay a commission to make another one of these hats. I've now made 5 of these hats. Now, for the most part, I don't consider these hats art, because I follow a pattern, I use the same yarn that the designer used, and everything about it, with very little exception, is altered. Now, I will do some alterations to modify the size if they have a smaller head and they want a smaller size than what the pattern really calls for. But aside from that, there's only one thing that I do to really add my artistic signature to this, and that's to create a unique hat band. And let me show you. So I have a couple that I've made already, and what I'll do, I usually use just scrap yarn that I have on hand. I make very customized hat bands that are generally one of a kind, because again, I'm using scrap yarn, and they can fit on the hat like so to make a very unique hat band. So that's the artistic piece of it, and each hat comes with its own. Now, this is my hat, so I've made a couple of them, and it kind of changes its overall personality, and that gives it a little bit more of that artistic flair. So that's it. I mean, that's just my personal, humble opinion. Everybody else is you're completely allowed to have your own opinion. You can disagree with me, and that's totally okay. But I thought you might be interested in what I thought about it, what the difference between art and craft. And I do honestly believe that crochet can be both art and craft, and it just depends on what we're making and how we're making it and how we're having fun with it. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much, and we will see you on Thursday.